Got it. Excellent.
Okay, so this is our first ever King of Cheese, Wizard of Wine, Wine and Cheese Chat podcast show. Oh, there's a cat on the camera there already. That's brilliant.
Oh, perfect timing.
Oh, that's superb. So my name's Stephen. I am cheese is my thing, and Ian, you're the wine wizard, aren't you? So
that's me. Yep. So hi everyone. This is Ian. I've been given the moniker the Wizard of Wine to go with Stephen being the King of Cheese.
Yeah. So we're just going to talk a little bit today about how we got into what we love, and we're going to taste some cheese and some wine as we go. So apologies to everyone watching and listening that you're not going to be able to get the full value of this, but we're certainly going to enjoy ourselves over the next half hour or so.
I reckon so.
Definitely, yeah. So Ian, tell me a bit about your wine interest and where that stems from. I gather it's something that's been there for a long time.
It is, yeah. So as a child growing up, my parents always had a Sunday lunch, and they always had some wine with that Sunday lunch. And from a very early age, they were encouraging me and my sister to taste wine or to have wine with the meal. Now, I must admit their tasting wine was a little bit iffy. So we'd have Lee-Crow Milch with the Sunday beef, which wasn't a classic combination. Yeah. But as they got older and they tasted more wines and they matured, they did start to drink some better wines for Sunday lunch. But I think it really took off when I went to university. And I remember as a fresher, the president of the student union suggesting you should sign up for as many clubs as possible. You don't have to then commit to all of them, but your inbox, your pigeonhole will be full and you'll look popular if nothing else.
Yeah.
I went around the Freshers' Fair and signed up for everything, including there was a wine tasting society. So duly, my pigeonhole did fill up, and one of the things in there was an advert for the Wine Tasting Society, which met at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday every week. And I went along to the first tasting, and they pitched it as an intro tasting. They had someone along who was giving going through a number of wines from around the world just to give the different styles, talking about how to taste wine. And it was their first meeting of the year. And I loved it. And from there, I ended up going every week. Every week was a tutored tasting. So they would get experts in from the London wine shippers and do tastings on Burgundies, Bordeaux's, Italian wines, Spanish wines, get people in from Austria, Australia, and so on. And they also had a wine tasting team. So yes, you can compete in wine tasting.
Wow, competitive wine tasting. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, and I managed to get onto the university's wine tasting team in my first year. And unbeknownst to me, I think I'd landed in the right place. Our university had probably the most active wine tasting society in the country. And apparently in the last 10 years, we'd won the inter-university wine tasting competition 9 times. And in my first year, and as I said, I made the team in my first year, we won it again. So I think someone said, "Oh, you've obviously got a nose for this." And maybe I do, maybe I don't, but I enjoyed it. And I stayed involved, and we were incredibly lucky. Our honorary president was a guy called David Rowe, who at the time was the editor of Decanter, but he was an ex-university, he was an alumnus of the university. And he took me out for dinner and just reeled off a whole load of names, gave me these guys' names and phone numbers and said, give these guys a call and see if you can get them to do tastings for you. And if you need to, just throw in my name. Yeah. So we managed to get some incredible guys coming along in that final year. And that was it, really. That was my love of wine was suddenly kindled at university and has stopped. So I've bought wines ever since, cellar them, love getting them out of cellars and ready to enjoy. And something I've enjoyed in the background, but it's now something I'm looking to do a little bit more with and see if I can do something for me in business with wine. But we're just not quite sure what yet.
This is about cheese tasting.
We have another guest in. My daughter's just popped up to see what's going on. This is my friend Ian, who talks about wine, and I'm going to talk about cheese. Are you going to go help Mummy wash the car? Go on, Pop, off you go. Come on, Pickle. You're going to go and help Mummy and Rufus, yeah? Good girl. Not putting on. Come on,
Nice
put
to
on.
meet you.
You gonna say hello? No.
No. Strange, scary man on the screen.
There we go. Oh, oh, where's your hand? Right, there we are. Push, push, push. Oh, it's a bit tight, isn't it? There we go. Right, you go and help mummy. I'll see you a bit later. I'll bring you some cheese, I promise.
Oh, so someone likes cheese from an early age in your house.
Oh, she has a very, very sophisticated and I dare say expensive taste in cheese. When she started chasing Vash around at Christmas time, she's like, "Oh, this is really lovely."
Oh,
So yeah,
I can only dream of that. So that was my introduction to wine. Stephen, tell us a bit about how you started in cheese.
sure. So I kind of, as a child, again, I'd always eaten a lot of cheese, and I didn't realize until I was a bit older, it was a bit unusual in our family that we had cheese on the table at breakfast, which is quite, it's a very, very normal thing in Europe, but in the UK, some of it's sort of odd. But I never really did much with it until about sort of 10 years or so ago. And I had a career in IT. It was my best subject at school, university, whatever. And then I turned 40 and was sort of thinking about what would I do if I'd had my time again and didn't go down such a straight line of doing the subject that I was perceived to be best at. And I had a feeling about something to do with food or delicatessen or something like that. And then some guys in Leeds started up a cheese tasting club called Homage to Fromage, which is an amazing name.
Yeah.
This all started on Twitter. I went along to the first meeting they had, and there was about a dozen of us there. And they put out 5 different cheeses. I think they were all cheddars at that time, all numbered, so that you didn't know which was which, any names. There was no kind of preconceptions about it. Which it turns out later on, they told me that was a last minute thing because they'd forgotten to bring any signs with a pen to write things on. So they were right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But actually that idea stuck, and it meant that every time they did them since, that you were tasting anonymously, tasting blindly. We tasted them, we tried it out. They managed to wheel out Alex James, who's the bass player from Blur, who was in Leeds promoting some of his cheeses at the time, which was a nice little touch. And it was a good evening. And I kept going, and about 6 months to a year later, it was still going stronger. They were getting 100 or so people in a pub in Leeds for a cheese meeting every month. And by that point, I had an idea I wanted to do something with cheese, and realized that there was maybe a market for it with all these people. And also there was nowhere else in my area selling cheese, which made me think, well, is there a reason for that? Is it just that, is there a gap in the market, or is it just that there's no market or money to be made? So I started doing farmers markets on a weekend. I was still doing my IT director job at the time. They picked up, did well. I focused on Yorkshire cheeses originally, just to kind of cut the world of cheese down, because there's 700 or 800 British cheeses and at least as many French, Italian, Spanish, American. There's thousands of them worldwide. And I, at the same sort of time, I saw a chance to do my IT director work on freelance basis for other businesses, and combine that with opening a cheese shop, which I did about 8 or 9 years ago. And fast forward to today, and the IT career has pretty much been retired and parked, and I'm full time with a cheese business that employs 8 or 9 people. And we've moved to a bigger shop, do a load of online stuff as well, and educational tasting events, instructional events. There's just a whole world of cheese things that we're doing, which is fantastic. It just helps me to, sort of just share what I love, which is eating and talking about cheese and stuff. And it's something I've found with you and with other people I've met in the kind of food and drink world, that everyone's just so keen to share and eager to share what they found, what they love, and enjoy it. It's just a wonderful thing, I think, really. Yeah.
Speaking about sharing those cheeses, perhaps we should start looking, let people see what we are here to take.
So
enjoy.
Let's start off. Let's start with the Ticklemore, which is this is a very unusual shaped goat's cheese.
Yeah.
Which this is from the Sharpham estate in Devon. It's a lovely creamy and slightly crumbly textured goat's cheese. They actually make it, they pour the curds of this into like a sort of colander shaped mold, which is why you get the whole cheese is like sort of a flying saucer shape.
Here we go.
Beautiful, with a salad with beetroot.
Wow.
We offer this to a lot of people who say they don't like goat's cheese.
Yep.
Because goat's cheese is one of those things that people have a fairly set mindset about. The same with blue cheese; they're very much either in or out. I think this is the one that can convert people.
I think so. I mean, it's, for me, compared to the classic goat's cheese that everyone would know, the stuff that you see on the supermarket shelf. This is the dry. It's much more creamy than that goat's cheese. Still got that kind of chalky flavour that you quite often associate with cheese. But yeah.
Yeah, if you closed your eyes, you could tell it was a goat's cheese. Definitely. Well, I have a feeling this would pair quite well with one of the wines that you've got.
It would. So let's go on to that. One of the wines we've got today is a Riesling. It's German, from Rheingau, made by a guy called Joseph Leitz. And one of the reasons for bringing it along, one of the reasons for wanting to taste it, is this particular one I bought in 2014. It's a 2013 vintage. So it's had a number of years in bottle. It's had about 8 years in bottle. And the reason for bringing it along is I wanted to show what happens to wines, or can happen to wines when you age them. So when you think about Rieslings, quite often, most of the Rieslings we get from the supermarket or from the shop on the high street, they're going to be young and we're going to drink them immediately. They're going to be very fresh, acidic, might be dry, might be sweeter. They're good, but they're going to have that sort of citrus fruit burst, floral aromas on them, a bit of acacia and honeysuckle potentially, but it's going to be very much about that freshness and minerality. As this has matured, it's you can see that the color is a little bit darker now than it would have been when it was
beautiful
first made.
Golden color, isn't it?
Yeah. So that color has developed in the bottle. On the nose as well, you can still smell the lemon and lime still there. There's a bit of stone fruit that's coming through, but
yeah.
For me, there's also something there that hints at what you're going to get on the palate as well. You can start to smell that floral aroma that would have been there when it was young has developed, and it's become more of a honey smell, and there's a little bit of ginger in the background.
You're right, there is. I'm definitely getting a note of ginger on the nose there.
And when you taste it, that honey and ginger really comes through. It's very forward. It's, although it's this wine would go on probably for another 10 years in the bottle, it's got that honey that's developed in the bottle is already there in spades. And I think it's that will go well with this goat's cheese. I mean, classic for goat's cheese is Sancerre. This goat's cheese with a little bit more oomph, a little bit more creaminess to it. I think, I could imagine myself putting it in a salad and then drizzling honey on top of it.
Yeah.
So why not have a wine that has a bit of honey with it? I think the two go fantastically well together, and I'm about to try that out.
Well, you said that this wine could possibly age on for another 8 to 10 years. Is there like an upper limit with wine in terms of aging and maturing? Is there a point at which you're kind of wasting your time, or does it continue to improve, or what?
Yeah, there's some, and different wines will age. So just because this Riesling's gone on for 8 years already, and will probably go on for another 8, doesn't mean that every Riesling will. And it depends how the wine's been made, and whether it's got what it needs in order to go on. So what wines, in order to age in the bottle, wine needs a preservative. And fortunately, wines come with natural preservatives. In the case of white wines, it's predominantly acid. But sugar, if it's a sweet wine, sugar will also help preserve the wine. For red wines, it's also acid again. But for red wines, as they're pressed on the skins, and in some cases on the stalks as well, there'll be tannins in there, which also help to preserve the wine. But the thing you've got to have, there's no good having a preservative, there's no flavour there. So you do really need bags of fruit, because that fruit flavour will deteriorate through time. So it's got to be enough fruit there for that to carry through that maturation process as well. So, not every wine will go on. You need good grapes with lots of flavour, as well as having that acid and that tannin to do that. So, this wine isn't the cheapest. It's not the most expensive either. It's not the cheapest Riesling out there. It's made with reasonable grapes. If you were to buy, a cheaper Riesling, it might be perfectly drinkable at a young age. But if you were to mature it, by the time you come to open it, you might find it's a bit thin, maybe it has developed some bottle age flavors, but you're now lacking the fruit behind it, and it tastes a little bit unbalanced. So yeah, I think there's it can be hard to know, but usually if you're buying it from when you're buying it from someone, they should be able to give you a guide on how long that wine will go on for.
Yeah.
And give you information. And another thing that I quite like to do is, when I get my wines out delivered to me from the cellar, if you've got a delivery of 12 bottles, you can open one, see how it's doing, and think to yourself, yeah, that's developed nicely, but maybe it's going to go on for another 2 years before I want to taste it again. So you then keep it in wherever you store your wine at home, and then go back to it through time, and you then have a little window as you're going through of seeing how it's developing, and then you may hit a sweet spot where you're going to go, actually, this is perfect now, I'm going to crack on through this and knock every bottle over in quick succession.
Lovely. Yeah, that's interesting you said, because I was just thinking as you were talking there about, I know with cheese, as it's maturing, you can take a sort of sample from it. They use a thing called a cheese iron, which is it looks like an apple corer, to pull a section of cheese out that you can taste and see how it's maturing and developing, and then push the rest back in so it can continue to go. Obviously with wine, you can't do that because you open the bottle's open. But and you answered the question I was thinking of, which was, do you just sort of open one and try it over the years and see how it's going, and then go, well, yeah, as you say, now's the time to drink the rest of this, or I'll just lay it down for another year or two and just keep on checking back. So yeah, that's interesting that's there. So it's all good. I mean, cheese obviously doesn't mature for anything like the length of time that wine does. I mean, the cheese we've got today, so the softer cheeses will mature for about 12 weeks. Some soft goat cheeses are only a few days old, in fact, but generally the longest you would get on a cheese is maybe about sort of 4 or 5 years for something like a really mature cheddar or a Parmesan.
Yes.
But I always think when the winemakers have to invest a hell of a lot of time and money and patience in waiting for their grapes to get to the right stage they can start harvesting, and then for laying wines down, it's a long time from initial outlay to end result, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, I met a guy earlier this year who retired and bought himself a reasonable chunk of land down in Hampshire, and decided he was going to grow grapes. I don't think he was going to make wine. He was going to grow the grapes and sell them to winemakers. So he had no vines on his property when he started. So he planted them. 5 years in, which is where he is now, he's just expecting to get his first crop.
Wow.
Of course, if you think back to March, April this year, we were having loads and loads of late frosts. And so he was getting really concerned that he was going to lose his crop before it even grown. He was out in the vineyards with fires and candles, trying to ward the frost off and seeing how much he could avoid losing. And then that will be his first crop. And typically for those young vines, the grapes will be not the best quality. Quite often you see on a wine label, old vine or Vieille Vigne in France, saying that this is an old wine. Now that's a meaningless term. There's no legal definition of it. So a winemaker can put that on, whether the wines are 5 years old or 80 years old. But you'd like to think that they're doing it when the vines are reasonably old. And the reason for that is those old vines, they produce much lower quantities of fruit. So you don't get nearly as many grapes per vine as you do from a young vine. But because of that, the grapes are really concentrated. And going back to that idea of being able to mature wine and what it needs, those old vines produce very concentrated flavors because they put so much effort into the small amount of grapes that they produce. But if you were planting your vines now and waiting for them to get to that state, you'd be retired by the time you got to them producing good quality old vine grapes. Yeah. So hopefully you've got some relative in the family who decided to go down the winemaking route and has left you with some vines that are nice and old and mature.
Inherit, yeah. Sounds good. Yeah, long process. Shall we try another cheese? While we're still on the white, I think we should dive in with the Brie. For the benefit of our viewers at home, I won't even try to pick this up because this is now sort of sliding about on paper. This is a beautiful British Brie called Baron Bigod, made down in Suffolk. And
Yes.
the guys that make it down at Fen Farm Dairy, they've got a French Brie de Meaux recipe. The geology, if you look at that part of look at that.
That's ready to go.
Condition. The geology they've got down there is not too similar to that of Normandy in northern France, where Brie is traditionally made. They've even imported the same kind of cattle across, so they've kind of got the same recipe, the same terroir, they call it. The land, they've got the animals, their own take on it. But I think this is one of the best Bries I've ever tasted. It's made with unpasteurized milk, which is believed to give a much bigger depth of flavor.
Wow.
They also make butter, and you can buy their milk from the farm as well. They have vending machines there where you can go down with a bottle and just get some raw milk, which I'd love. I've tried it. I'd love to be able to sell it, but the rules are such that we're not allowed to sell unpasteurized milk in the UK anywhere other than on the farm, at the farm gate. So the farms can sell it, but it's
well, that's
a shame. There'd be a big market for this stuff if they could get it out further, I think.
No, you now sown a seed in me. I want to go visit that farm and try some unpasteurized milk. So this is for Brie. This is incredible.
Yeah.
It doesn't. I mean, I'll admit, to me, it doesn't look like a Brie on the plate. It's far darker than I'm used to seeing for a Brie.
Yeah.
And that comes through, as you'd expect, with that darker color. It's not. It's got a lot more flavor, or a very different flavor to the kind of Brie that I'm used to getting from the local shops around here. More French Bries. Wow.
It's really good. I imagine this might go quite nice with the Riesling as well, actually.
I'm going to try with that first. I mean, naturally, I want to try it with the red wine we've got, but let's try it with the
let's just mix it up a bit. I think they harmonise quite nicely.
So again, this is a cheese that I would be happy to pour a load of honey on, so the wine would go with it. But
yeah,
with that really quite luxurious fatty texture that it's got, it actually strips away some of that sweetness, and you can taste the sort of the green fruit coming through, the apples and pears a little bit more. It's
you're right, actually, it does. Yeah, it does kind of make it a bit more refreshing. And it cuts through, as you say, cuts through the fats of the cheese in a really good way.
That's great.
Really good. I mean, this is a great example of the kind of the renaissance in British cheese production that's happened in the last sort of 15, 20 years or so. Would have been, if we wanted a Brie 10 years or so back, you'd be looking at getting something from France in the supermarket, or even from a cheesemonger's. But to get this kind of quality, and people are looking not only to old British recipes but old continental recipes as well. So it's great to see these styles coming through. Really good.
No, it is. So as you say, when you say Brie, I immediately think of French cheese. I remember seeing Somerset Brie in various shops. But in the same way you see cheddar from all over the world, why shouldn't we see good quality Bries from the UK?
Absolutely. It's we did a blind tasting a couple of years ago. It literally was a blindfold tasting where we put sort of supermarket versions of cheeses against these kind of versions, and I tried to get the best of the supermarket French Bries I could find, and it just taste wise didn't get anywhere near to the depth of flavor that this has got. So it was quite an eye-opener. Good.
And is that a volume thing that these guys are producing, able to get this kind of flavor because they're producing at a much lower volume? And
I think I think there's partly a volume thing. It's partly the fact that it's an unpasteurized cheese, so you get the flavors will vary. They've got their own herd of animals, so the flavors will vary depending on the time of year. I suspect with some of the more mass-produced Bries that they are toning the flavor down a bit in order to appeal to a mass market. So there's maybe they'll flatten off some of the more interesting flavors to give mass appeal, which is understandable if that's their business, but I'm sure that happens with wine as well. And the more interesting, all the interesting stuff is always more around the edges, isn't it? It's what's in the center is usually okay and consistent, but you're not going to get anything earth-shatteringly amazing in terms of flavors.
Well, I'm having to lick my fingers there, it's just running over them. But yes, you're right, and it comes back to the same, touches on some of the things we've already talked about in terms of the fruit, but also, you know, bottle age. If you're going into the supermarket to buy your wine, you're probably not thinking about then laying it down for 8 to 10 years. So those wines, a lot of wine that's made is made to be drunk young.
Yeah.
So, you know, you don't have to spend so much on the good fruit. You don't have to be trying to extract so much tannin for a red wine from the skins. It doesn't have to be quite so acidic. You may even tone down the acidity.
Yeah.
For a white wine in order to try and make something that's just instantly drinkable out of the bottle. Whereas, you know, if you go and buy a phenomenal Barolo, for example, and, you know, as soon as it's, and admittedly in Barolo, they don't release them very young, but if you were to drink it straight away from as soon as you've got it, you're going to have something that's, it'll be so chewy because there's so much tannin in there. It'll feel like the wine's stripping all the water out of your mouth.
Lovely.
Or you're drinking really stewed tea.
Yeah.
It won't be pleasant, and you'll be going, why did I spend all this money on this wine, on this bottle? And the reason being, the guy who made it didn't think you were going to be drinking it at that point. He thought you were going to be putting it in a cellar for a good 10 years. Whereas, you know, you go into the supermarket and buy, you know, a Chilean Merlot or something. It's been made to a price point, and also with a view that it's going to be drunk instantly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a very similar story around the sort of differences between supermarket and artisan cheese production as well. Very, very similar story. Shall we move on? Conscious time is ticking away from us at a rapid rate. Shall we move on to the red that you brought? Because I've got a cheese that I imagine will go really well with this.
Okay, let's do that. So, red wine, here we go. It's a 2014. And you can't really read the label, but on it says Passo Rosso, and it comes from a vineyard on Mount Etna in Sicily called Passo Pisciaro. The winemaker is a guy called Franchetti. So he is quite famous in Tuscany, Franchetti, for making Tenuta di Trinolo. It's one of the big super Tuscans. And like a lot of winemakers, he's gone out and found other areas in Italy, and he's now, you know, working his magic in those areas. I love this wine. It's one of those wines that every year it comes out, and I buy it and just put it down and wait for it to mature and get it out. It's not super expensive. So the Riesling that we just had, when I bought that in 2014, it was £21 a bottle in bond. So probably more like about £27 with duty paid and so on. This wine was about, I think it was £140 for 6. So again, similar, around 20, I don't know, 23, £24 a bottle.
Yeah.
So it was closer to £28, £29 with taxes paid. But when traditionally, when I thought about Sicilian wines before I had this wine, I would think typically of Nero d'Avola. That's the most famous Sicilian wine. So there you're thinking of, you know, quite big, dark, fruity wines. Not so much tannin behind it. You know, not meant to be aged for a huge amount of time. Very cooked. You know, you could tell they'd come from a hot climate. But this wine, as I mentioned, is from Mount Etna. It's grown up on the slopes. There's several different vineyards he has, and he actually makes individual vineyard wines. But this, the Passo Rosso, is a blend from each. So because of that, he's able to vary the blend each year and produce something that's a little bit more consistent. So you don't have to worry too much about vintage variation. But the vineyards are at various altitudes, 800 meters above sea level and so on. And you've got, you know, if someone gave this to you blind, most people, you know, would be sitting there picking it as a Pinot Noir. It's light, you can see it's a light color in the glass. You can see your fingers through the wine in the glass.
Lovely color.
On the nose, there's red fruit there. You know, that you can see red cherries, raspberries, cranberries. And so far, so Pinot. And then you taste it. And it's the same again. You know, it's those red fruit, cranberries, red cherries, and so on. if you'd have opened it younger, they'd be nice and fresh. As it's matured a little bit, they're a little bit more, they're a little riper. But there is just a little bit of minerality in the background that you don't necessarily see in Pinot. And you know, whether that comes from the grape or it comes from the soil is a matter of debate. But I think it's one of the things that just differentiates it. There's just a little bit of, it's almost like iron mineral in the background. And I should mention the grape, and it's a grape called Nerello Mascalese. So it's not something that has, you know, you see them on the supermarket shelves. And so it's another reason for bringing this wine along is just to show that there are some fantastic grapes out there that aren't in the mainstream, produce some very interesting wines, you know, that are worth a look. If you think about, if you were to compare this to a Burgundian wine, you're thinking about the quality you've got in the glass here, you'd be spending an awful lot more money for this than you'd spend, you know, the 25, 30 pounds a bottle that this is. So let's see what you'd pair this one with. I'm waiting to see.
I think the cheese I want to put with this is the Yorkshire Fiore. Now this is Pecorino style. So we've got, you know, Italian wines, Italian cheeses. This is made by is actually from Sardinia originally, a guy called Mario Olianos, who moved to Leeds about 10 or so years ago, 20, no, more like 18 years ago. Started making cheese as a bit of a competition with his brother. He had sort of two main cheeses he makes. One is a Pecorino Fresco, which is a 30-day Pecorino. This is aged for about 3 or 4 months. And when we were talking about this red, about the Etna red, I just thought, yeah, it's going to need something like a sort of salty Pecorino to go with it. And this is the one that sprung to mind for me.
Wow.
It's made with sheep's milk, this one, like as Pecorinos generally are.
Ooh, I like that combination. Wow,
that can make things take off, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It suddenly makes the so suddenly it makes the wine seem a whole lot fuller.
Yeah, it's sort of singing, isn't it? The wine's really.
Yeah. Wine suddenly comes alive with this cheese, and I think it's out of the cheeses we've had so far, this is the most salty.
It is, yeah.
Salt is a real friend of wine. It makes it feel much more fruity, and you know, you can taste that instantly with the wine. The wine suddenly leaps out of the glass after having a little bit of this cheese.
That's a good batch, because quite when you get a bad pairing, it just is like a bit of a car crash going, isn't it? Nothing wins, but this, right? Because this elevates the cheese as well, I think. Tempers the saltiness slightly, but brings more flavour out.
Ooh.
Really
right,
good.
so being silent on our podcast now, because we're just enjoying that a bit too much, I think.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we throw in one quick more cheese with this red, which is the blue that we've got.
So before you do that, I've got one question for you.
Yeah, far away.
So far for the Ticklemore and for the Brie, you know, I've just quite happily cut into those and eaten them rind and all.
Yeah.
And I'm deliberately asking this because you know, normally for the hard cheese like Fiore, I would have cut the rind off, and I noticed you didn't. And so I want to ask you about that. I deliberately followed suit and ate the rind where I wouldn't have normally done so.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's one that generally I tend to sort of tell people at the start of cheese tastings to do, is that we should really, unless it's a plastic coating, cheese rinds are generally always edible. And I would really always recommend trying both the center of the cheese and the rind, because the rind it's all cheese. Well, that sounds obvious, but what you'll find is that there'll be quite often be a greater depth of flavor at the rind than there is in the center, because it's had more exposure to the air. It's had, you know, it's matured a lot more. And I just, sometimes you find, I mean, there are some matured cheddars I've tried where the rind goes a bit bitter. It's maybe not to my taste, but generally I find this, you know, it's certainly worth a try. But it's, yeah, it breaks my heart when I see people cut the rinds off and leave them, because I feel they're leaving, in some ways, the most interesting bit behind. And I would always recommend, if you don't want the rinds to eat, to certainly keep them in a box in the fridge and then use them in cooking, because you can toss cheese rinds, particularly things like Parmesan rinds, which are quite hard, if you throw this into a tomato sauce 5 minutes before you're going to serve it, you'll just get a lovely glossy sheen, and it just adds that salty kick to it as well.
I have never done that before, but I'm going to try that. And while you were just talking, I just took the Fiore, cut myself another slice, and then cut it in half, and ate separately the piece that was from the centre versus the piece with the rind. Yeah, and the difference in the flavour is noticeable. And in this case, it's not unpleasant.
No, not at all. That's it.
The centre of the cheese is fresher. You know, tastes like it's younger cheese. The outside of the cheese tastes, it's got a bit more. It's harder, as you'd expect, from a what feels like a more mature cheese, because you get that more mature flavour that comes with it too.
Yeah.
So that's 2 cheeses in one.
2 for 1. You see, this is it. And if you cut the rind and throw it away, you're losing half the experience. So, yeah, no, it's all good. So I think we'll just finish with the blue that we've got, and this is Buffalo Blue. So this is made with buffalo milk by a dairy called Shepherd's Purser up in Thurston, North Yorkshire. They started about 25 years ago making sheep's milk cheeses to start with, but they've expanded to cow's milk, and now they do this buffalo one as well. And this is one of their pricier ones, because buffalo milk, has a higher price point, but it's so creamy. And again, it's one that I give to people that say, "Oh, I don't like blue cheese." I'll get them to try this because it is amazing. And it's got that saltiness, real salt, more saltier again than the Fiore was.
Yeah.
I need a bit more wine to go with this because I've polished off what was there.
It's surprisingly creamy. Right, I'm going to try this with the white wine as well.
Okay.
So I want to see what it's like with that.
I will do the same. I'm feeling it. My feeling it pairs nicely with that red. It's not doing anything crazy.
Here we go with the white wine. Oh,
that's good. You've got those honey notes. There's blue cheese and honey. You've got a great combo there.
Yes, I think white wine all day. The Riesling all day for me.
That's the business, isn't it? And that's a really good thing, a good point to make, actually, because I think a lot of people think, oh, wine and cheese, it's got to be red wine, particularly with the blue that's strong. But actually, what you've just demonstrated there is that there aren't any rules really.
Well, yeah, and also, the cheese will have more of an impact on the wine than the other way around, which is a general rule. Food will have more impact on the flavour of the wine than the other way around. But there is no one wine to go with cheese. There are so many different flavours of cheese that you should, you could get out 6 different wines and 6 different cheeses and try and pair them up, and I'm sure people would come up with ideal combinations.
Definitely.
One thing I would like to do, this Riesling, although it tastes of honey, isn't particularly sweet, and I'd like to try something a bit sweeter with this as well. That would be take it up another level, I think.
Take it even further, yeah, absolutely, for sure. That's brilliant. Well, I think that's a real good and interesting note to leave our viewers and listeners on, and hopefully hankering for a bit more.
Yes. So there you have it. That's the ever missive from the King of Cheese and the Wizard of Wine.
Absolutely.
I hope you enjoyed that show, and hopefully this is the start of something we can do regularly.
Absolutely. It's a very pleasant way to spend an hour on a Friday afternoon.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, beats working, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, this is working for me, so this is super.
Well, hopefully it'll be working for me at some point, but right now,
yeah, I'm sure it will be. Great stuff.
Thanks, everyone, and see you next one.